Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into one of the most pivotal and honestly chilling moments in ancient history. We're going to unpack a battle that didn't just redraw the entire map of India, but completely rewired the brain of its most ruthless emperor. We're talking about a guy who went from being known for unimaginable, terrifying cruelty to literally becoming the ancient world's biggest ambassador for peace. It's a wild shift, and it all starts here. Picture this for a second. You're a soldier standing on the muddy banks of the Daya River. You look down, and as this quote captures so perfectly, beneath your feet there are only corpses and overflowing rivers of blood. That's not just some poetic exaggeration. That was the grim, day-to-day reality of history's most terrifying massacre. Imagine just looking out across a massive plain and seeing absolutely nothing but total destruction. We aren't just rattling off dates today. We're looking at a profoundly devastating human tragedy. So, let's start by looking at Chandashoka's boundless ambition. You see, early on in his reign, Ashoka earned himself a pretty terrifying nickname, Chandashoka. And honestly, he completely lived up to it. The guy had this unquenchable hunger for power that literally nothing could satisfy. I mean, his empire was already massive, stretching across most of the Indian subcontinent. But he was always looking at the horizon, just hunting for that next territory to crush and conquer. He was, through and through, a man driven entirely by the sword. Which brings us to the prosperous and fiercely independent state of Kalinga. Now, Ashoka had his eyes locked on one specific prize. It was this total obsession for him. On one hand, you've got Ashoka's Mauryan Empire, this relentless, unstoppable machine of conquest. But on the other hand, you have Kalinga, located in modern-day Odisha. And Kalinga was something else entirely. They were prosperous, they had this amazing maritime trade network that made them ridiculously wealthy, and most importantly, they were fiercely independent. They valued their freedom above literally everything else. And Ashoka just couldn't stomach that. For a conqueror like him, Kalinga's wealth and autonomy were basically a giant slap in the face. It challenged his supremacy. So he makes this incredibly cold, calculated decision. Kalinga's pride has to be broken, no matter the cost. It wasn't even just about grabbing more land anymore. It was about forcing their absolute submission. And that boiling tension leads us directly into the massive massacre of 261 BC. When that massive Mauryan invasion force finally rolled in, it was absolute chaos. But Kalinga didn't just roll over. They put up an unbelievable fight. We're talking about every single citizen, men, women, kids, grabbing whatever swords they could find to defend their homes. It was this desperate, incredibly heroic last stand. But, tragically, bravery alone doesn't win against a military machine. The sheer, crushing weight of Ashoka's forces just totally overwhelmed them. To put the scale of this carnage into perspective, 100,000. That is how many Kalingans were slaughtered on that battlefield. 100,000 people. Entire generations were literally wiped off the map in a matter of days. The loss of life is it's almost too staggering to wrap your head around. And honestly, the nightmare didn't stop with the dead. 150,000 people were captured and dragged away as prisoners of war. Imagine that. Families totally ripped apart, homes burned to the ground. A society that was once this proud, booming hub of independence was just decimated and enslaved in the blink of an eye. Let's look at the terrifying scene of this so-called victory. The accounts from the aftermath are straight out of an apocalypse. The Daya River, which cut right through the battlefield, was literally running red with blood. Try to visualize that for a second. Mountains of corpses stacked up on the earth. It wasn't a beautiful triumph. It was a devastating, grotesque monument to Ashoka's greed. So Ashoka walks out onto the battlefield, right? He's probably expecting this massive, deafening roar of applause from his victorious soldiers. He wants the glory. But instead, it's just dead silent. This eerie, heavy silence from his own army. The only sounds he can hear are the agonized wails of widows and the terrified screams of orphaned kids wandering through the bodies. The reality of what he just did hits him like a freight train. This brings us to his incredible pivot, the journey from Chandashoka to Dhammasoka. Hearing those screams completely shattered his cold heart. It triggered this profound, immediate spiritual awakening that absolutely nobody saw coming. Standing there in the mud and the blood, staring at the families he ruined, he had this massive realization. He hadn't won a kingdom, Actually, scratch that. He hadn't won anything. He had lost his own humanity. He suddenly saw that this wasn't some glorious military win. It was the ultimate devastating defeat of basic human decency. So what does he do? It's a complete 180. Right there on the battlefield, he literally drops his blood-stained weapons forever. He swears this solemn, unbreakable oath that he will never, ever wage war again. He turns his back on violence entirely, dives deep into the teachings of Buddhism, and decides to use his massive empire to spread a global message of peace and compassion. And that's the transformation. He completely sheds that terrifying Chandashoka persona. In his place steps Dhammasoka, the follower of Dharma. He swapped out the drum of war for the drum of righteousness. It's a powerful reminder that even the absolute darkest hearts can find profound redemption. So wrapping up today's explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought. Looking at Ashoka's journey, from a tyrant wading through a river of blood to a monarch dedicating his life to peace, we really have to ask ourselves, can true victory ever be achieved through violence and war? It's a huge question, and honestly, it's just as relevant to us today as it was over 2,000 years ago on the banks of the Daya River. I'd love to hear your take on this, so drop your thoughts down in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, and join us next time as we keep unpacking history's most fascinating turning points. Thanks for hanging out and learning with me today.